Dear Doctor, good evening. I myself, Jagdish Joshi, Senior Vice President, Macleod Pharma Division, welcomes each one of you for this webinar, Expert Insight in the Management of Tinnitus and OSMF. You all will agree early diagnosis play a very important role in the treatment, management of tinnitus and OSMF. I am thankful to Dr. Kausal Seth, Dr. Vikas Agrawal, who will be sharing their vast experience. With this, I now hand over session to Dr. Mamta Jain.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mamta Jain from Medwiz Healthcare Communication. I, on behalf of Macleod Pharma, welcome all of you all, and it is an extreme privilege of mine to introduce today's eminent speakers. I'll just share my slide for a moment. Just a second, please. We have two eminent speakers today, and yeah. The technology sometimes keeps it across the moment that you don't expect it to do. The speakers today actually do not need an introduction. They are high achievers. International spectrum of otolaryngology. So we have the first speaker today, Dr. Kausal Seth. Dr. Kausal Seth is the National Secretary of Association of Otolaryngologists in India. He is the past president of AOI Mumbai. He's an honorary ENT surgeon at St. JB Municipal ENT Hospital, consultant ENT surgeon at Excel ENT Hospital. And his special interests are from endoscopy, sinus surgeries, robotic ASA. He has been a speaker both at national and international forums and are highly recognized for his, not just for his publication, but for his speaker skills too. He's an alumni with TN Medical College and BYL Nair Hospital, editorial board member with Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgeon, International Online Journal since 2016. He's a gold medalist with DORL examination 2001. He had the best dissertation award in his MS exams in 2002, faculty and co-chairman with the first robotic life surgery course on OSA in Asian Heart Institute 2013. He finished his OSA many fellowship course from Singapore. He was an organizing secretary with MentCon 2015, MumbaiCon 2017. As I mentioned before, he has had several publications in the PubMed international journals. And as usual, always the speaker eminent invited as for obstructive sleep apnea, more than 35 conferences, seminars, workshops that he's personally organized. Dr. Kausal Seth, a big warm welcome from our side. I'm taking it across with you to the next talk.
Thank you, Dr. Jain, for this warm welcome. Shall I share my slide?
Let me just, I'll stop sharing. Yeah.
Shall I share my slide? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
All right. So, thank you once again, Dr. Jain, for this warm introduction. Thank you, Mr. Joshi, for giving us this wonderful platform, and the Macleod team who has been behind this CME series since last year. They've been organizing so many of these. Thank you, sirs. So, friends, I'm going to talk today on the management of oral submucous fibrosis. Oral submucous fibrosis, OSMF, as we know, is a widely prevalent condition in our country. Now, this is because of the cultural habits that we've had over centuries of consuming areca nut, betel nut with our food. Many of these patients present to us in our clinics seeking relief from the severe physical and mental stress that they that they have incurred because of this condition. Furthermore, since it is a progressive disorder, it leads to severe restricted mouth opening with poor oral hygiene and thus limits the patient's social life too. Takes a toll on that also. We as ENT surgeons should be able to offer all the different modalities of treatment available to this patient as per the severity. So, oral cavity has been rightly described as the mirror of the body as it reflects the health. It's a unique tissue which is lined by keratinized and non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium and connective tissue. This mucosa throughout our lifetime is exposed to various chemicals, microorganisms, thermal changes, mechanical and chemical irritants. These changes affect the epithelial and connective tissue components depending upon the time of their exposure, and these result in acute and chronic reactive changes. The term oral submucous fibrosis was coined by Joshi way back in 1953, and OSAF, as we all know, is a disease of insidious onset and a prevailing potentially malignant disorder characterized by a juxtaepithelial inflammatory reaction along with a lot of mucosal fibrosis. It's also characterized by deposition of dense collective collagen in the connective tissue. We all know that it's a potentially malignant disease and is predominantly seen in India and the Indian subcontinent. The commonest age group of patients that are affected are from 20 to 40 years of age, wherein all the bad habits of tobacco chewing, gutka, khaini set in during the teenage times. About 0.5 to 0.5% of our population is affected by this disorder as per various studies. When a patient walks into our clinic, clinically we can identify the severity of the disease and do a clinical staging there itself based on the mouth opening and based on the structure seen inside the mouth. Stage 1 clinically is where only the facial bands are seen inside the mouth, and stage 3 is where all the three facial, buccal and labial bands are seen. If the mouth opening is greater than 20 millimeters, it's considered as stage 1, and less than 10 millimeters, it's considered as stage 3. OSMF is a multifactorial disorder. The local factors which cause this issue are chilies, consumption of erica and betel nut, as I mentioned earlier. Now, if the patient has a lot of nutritional deficiencies, a genetic predisposition, autoimmune factors, all these also contribute towards its formation. Tobacco, whether it is in the smokeless form or consumed smoking, leads to this. Capsaicin in the chilies is the active ingredient and is a mild irritant. It causes an epithelial and connective tissue change in these patients. All these OSMF patients just cannot tolerate the spicy food. Hence, this leads to decreased mouth opening also, which is there present. It leads to nutritional deficiencies. Erica nut, which is grown widely in our country, is responsible for this condition to a great extent. The four alkaloids, that is ericoline primarily, ericadane, guaiacane, and guaiacol, along with the flavonoid components, are primarily responsible for causing the fibroblastic proliferation and causing fibrosis inside the oral cavity. So when a patient presents to us, he's already had, if he's predisposed to having a deficiency of iron, vitamins, and so forth, and if he's got this chronic habit of betel nut and erica nut chewing, depending on the duration and depending on the frequency of eating, whether he eats once a day or 5-7 times a day, there is a constant irritation of the buccal mucosa which happens. The chemical and mechanical irritation causes a chronic inflammation, leading to increase in the cytokines and growth factors. Finally, this leads to oral submucous fibrosis, which is, as we all know, precancerous lesion. Patients can present to us in 2 stages. Patients who come with early OSMF changes have burning sensations, blisters, ulcerations, excessive salivation, or even dryness of the mouth, along with disordered gustatory sensation. Whereas the patients with advanced OSMF have blanched white fibrous bands. They have a decreased mobility of the tongue. They are unable to blow or whistle, and they have a difficulty in swallowing also, because OSMF also affects the larynx to a certain extent. These patients also can present with a simple nasal twang. These are the patients who have presented in our OPD. Here you can see the first one, you can see the soft palate, which shows blanching and the fibrous shortened uvula. In the second picture, you can see blanching on the ventral surface of the tongue. And in the third, you can see ulcerations and blisters. These are the early changes that you can see. In the later changes, you can see there's a decreased mouth opening, and in this patient, it's about stage 3. Most of these patients also present with buccal mucosa to a great extent. If we subject these patients to hematological investigations, in most of them we find there's a decrease in the serum iron levels, a decrease in vitamin B12 and the folate levels. Also, there is an increase in ESR, anemia and eosinophilia that is seen. I strongly advocate taking a biopsy in all the oral submucous fibrosis patients, because OSMF is associated with a higher incidence of squamous cell carcinoma, epithelial dysplasias, and leukoplakias. Management strategies is multi-pronged. It should be based on the disease severity. It should focus on reversing, on alleviating the signs. It should also focus on stopping the progress of the disease and minimizing the risk of its malignant transformation, because it's a precancerous lesion. The mainstay of the treatment is restriction of habits. The patient has to reduce or completely eliminate the habit of erica nut chewing, betel nut, tobacco, gutka, whatever. The patient should also be consuming a high protein and high calorie diet, which should include lots of vitamin B complex, minerals, ions, and other things. Intake of red tomatoes, fresh fruits, and green leafy vegetables have found to be very effective. Lycopene nowadays is available in the market. This can be given as 8 to 10 milligram twice a day for 2 months, because it reduces the free radical reaction. Lycopene is a major carotenoid synthesized by the plants, tomatoes, and microorganisms. It inhibits the fibrogenesis, suppresses the inflammatory response, and upregulates the leukocyte resistance. It can be used as the first-line therapy along with other nutrients for the initial management of early stage of OSMF. Patient needs to be taught a lot of mouth opening exercises. Whenever he is free, he needs to be doing that, so that the fibrous bands which are forming kind of become very soft. He can take the help of appliances like a Heister's jaw opener, or he can do the mouth opening exercises using these wooden spatulas, one on top of the other, in a graded form. The newer mouth gags, which are made up of acrylic, are equally effective. Now, intralesionally in our clinic, we can give injections of either enzymes like hyaluronidase, a chymotrypsin, or a collagenase, or the glucocorticoids. Corticosteroids are the mainstay of the treatment. Corticosteroids suppress the inflammatory response by their anti-inflammatory action. They also prevent the fibrosis by decreasing the fibroblastic proliferation and deposition of collagen. Thus, local or topical applications can be done. Local injections or topical applications can be done. Hyaluronidase actually breaks down the hyaluronic acid. This lowers the viscosity of the intercellular cement substance, thus decreasing the collagen formation. Now, intralesional injections in multiple sites wherever you see the white fibrous bands can be given. The dose of Hyalase should be 1,500 international units, along with chymotrypsin 5,000 international units, plus dexamethasone 4 milligram in 2% lignocaine, so that it's not painful to the patient. Multiple sites can be given weekly. Certain vasodilators like pentoxifylline can also be given to the patient, because these are peripheral vasodilators. They increase the hampered mucosal vascularity in these patients. Vitamin A, C, D, B complex, as we all know, accelerate the ulcer healing and relieve the pain symptoms in these patients. Iodine placental extracts and topical applications of triamcinolone have been used to a certain extent. But however, all these modalities have a higher success rate if they are used together in a combination and never individually. Coming to the surgical management of this condition. As surgeons, these are the modalities of treatment that we can offer to our patients. We can do a submucosal resection of the fibrous bands using a laser, a CO2 laser. We can do a bilateral temporalis myotomy or a coronoidectomy. We can use a nasolabial flap or a lingual pedicle flap to reconstruct, or we can use a spit skin graft or a mucosal graft to take care of the reconstruction. Now, submucosal resection of the fibrous bands can be done with a CO2 laser. The point here I would like to highlight is, please do not take vertical or horizontal incisions. The fibrosis will recur. You need to take Z-shaped incisions to prevent that. If you're doing the buccal leukoplakia or the buccal fibrotic bands at the same incision, then you please take care to avoid the Stenson's duct, which just opens next to the upper molars. Most important thing is, post-operatively in all these patients, you have to advocate the use of a Heister's jaw opener to prevent trismus and fibrosis from setting in. The advantage with using a laser is that it can be used multiple times. However, it should be used only in the early cases and not advanced cases. And the minimum criteria for using a laser is the mouth opening should be roughly between 18 to 20 millimeters. Now, the use of nasolabial flap in OSMF is been used for since the last 1 decade. This is a patient who presented to my OPD with a mouth opening of about 18 to 20 millimeters. You can see the thick fibrous bands there, the lingual bands. So we worked up the patient and we took him up for surgery. We marked out the 2 nasolabial flaps, keeping the facial artery position in mind. This is the harvesting of the nasolabial flap. It's very easy. Once you harvest the flap, you can make a tunnel in the buccal mucosa and you can patch up the area and see the mouth opening improves dramatically. However, there is a disadvantage to this. There is a little visible scarring on the face, but this is a well accepted, a well harvesting technique, and it's got a high success rate. This can be overcome if the patient grows some beard or something. You can see the post-op, how much the mouth opening has improved from the pre-op position. This is the second case which we have done. Another case which I would like to show, a reconstruction done with nasolabial flap, bilateral harvest. This is a very young patient. If you see the facial structures, features, it's just in the early teens. Maybe as far as I remember, this person was 19 years old. So we've harvested nasolabial flaps on both the sides, and see, that is the bed. See the reconstruction done with that flap. We have even used free radial forearm flaps in extensive cases of OSMF. Now, free radial forearm flaps are widely accepted and they are considered as the gold standard in reconstruction, simply because they are reliable and easily accessible. The flap is thin, pliable, and relatively hairless with a long pedicle base. And the most important thing is there is no facial or cosmetic scarring. The donor site can be easily closed primarily with or without a skin graft. As I mentioned earlier, after any laser surgery or the nasolabial flap surgery, post-operative physiotherapy is very essential. Vigorous mouth opening exercises are recommended to achieve an adequate mouth opening to avoid recurrence of the trismus which can follow the surgery. This is started as soon as the wound healing intraorally takes place. It can be done with the help of wooden tongue spatulas which are kept between the molar teeth, and daily they are increased in a staggered fashion to facilitate maximum mouth opening. It should be performed for at least 3 minutes for 3 times a day for at least 3 months. Or you can use the Heister's mouth jaw. Probably that will be a little painful in the initial stages post-op. Most important thing for the patient is to stop the Erica nut habit. This is to prevent the recurrence of fibrosis. And of course, you need to keep a regular follow-up of these patients to see that there is no malignant transformation happening inside the oral cavity. take-home message is that there is no single treatment modality which is effective for OSMF. Areca nut is the primary cause, and we've seen that stopping its use completely has a very good effect on the mucosa if done in the right way. Targeted education and the legislative changes for reducing the areca nut dependence still remains an essential part of the global management of OSMF. Soft tissue recons such as the nasolabial flaps are good and a reliable option to manage the trismus. The future research should also focus on targeting the various molecules and pathways which have been identified in order to search for effective treatment, as the mortality and morbidity associated with these conditions is significantly higher. So in the future, we may see stem cell therapy coming in. These here, intralesional injection of autologous bone marrow stem cells are done, and it is shown to be very effective treatment in managing OSMF. It is done in the Western countries, and I'm sure it should be available in India in the next few years. Stem cells induce neoangiogenesis, which release cytokines and the growth factors, and thus decrease the extent of fibrosis, leading to a significant increase in the mouth opening. Thank you very much for a patient hearing, and thank you once again, Dr. Mamta Jain and Mr. Joshi, for providing this platform.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushal. Thank you so much. A very, very common condition, especially in India, when we see it across where the areca nut consumption is so high. Though not a very commonly spoken topic in ENT, but I think it's a most common as far as indication goes and the people suffering across onto it. A highly ignorant one, but a very, very important in terms of both epidemiology and the complications that it can, and the quality of life impact. Similarly, the second topic, thanks, Doctor. So I'll go across to the second topic today. Yes, the second topic, again, is a very interesting one. We barely talk about it, but one of the most irritating topic that we would have it across in terms of ENT, and especially with the patients that we are talking about. And with me here sharing it across is another very, very eminent ENT surgeon of India, and a big name at the international arena also, because these days I don't see any of the international meetings, especially in sleep apnea and tongue surgery, that is happening without him being invited as a speaker. Dr. Vikas Agrawal is a past president with Indian Association of Surgeons of Sleep Apnea. He's the first one to do the first robotic sleep apnea surgery in India, and surgeon in India. Director, Specialty ENT Hospital, Satyam Tower, Mumbai. Performed the first robotic-based tongue surgery for OSA in India. Performed the first live robotic-based tongue surgery workshop in the world, July 2013. Discovered the role of salpingopharyngeal fold in lateral collapse of OSA and classified it. He's also performed the first submucous endoscopy tongue-based resection in Asia for severe sleep apnea, and published guidelines for sleep surgery and informed consent for during his tenure as president of Indian Association of Surgeons for Sleep Apnea. So Dr. Vikas Agrawal, from too many first, let's come down to the first lecture. I mean, one of the very interesting one lecture that we will have it across with tinnitus. So over to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah, a very good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Mamta. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Mamta, and thanks to MacLeod Pharma team, Mr. Joshi and the whole team for inviting me here. And as Dr. Mamta said, I'm going to talk for the first time on tinnitus, because tinnitus as such is a topic which has escaped attention of most of the ENT surgeons when we were doing our MS, or when we actually started our practice. So we are all interested in surgical things, to be honest. But this is such an important topic that when Dr. Mamta asked me to speak on that, I said, I'll really be interested on speaking on that topic. And I'd like to share my screen here. Is my screen visible, ma'am? Hello?
Yes, Vikas.
Yeah. It is visible. It is visible.
Okay. So insights in the management of tinnitus. Now, what is tinnitus? Tinnitus is a sound which is perceived by the patient when there's actually no sound. There's no external sound, but the patient is feeling that there's a sound which is actually coming to him, and he is actually bothered by that sound. Many ways he or she describes the sound as humming, ringing, buzzing, roaring, crackling. And actually, because there's no sound, it's a ghost. So nobody knows what the sound is like. When the patient, because it's a illusion, he does not know what is happening to him. It's an illusion which is happening to him or her. So the patient also describes this as all different ways. The same patient would describe the sound in different ways, and different patient would describe the same sound in different ways. So we really cannot take it absolutely on face value what is happening inside, but we have to have a, imagine what is happening inside. And as most of the time this happens, this is the story of an elephant, which is described in different ways by people who are all blind. So in this picture, you see that people are all blind. So basically, nobody knows what is happening. The patients do not know what is actually bothering them, but this is some kind of sound which is bothering them. This sound actually gives them a very, very bad quality of life. Their inner silence is gone, because when we talk of the best times of our life, we talk of the time that we are sitting sitting besides a river in a quiet, or in the morning or in the late night when we are with ourselves. This most important time with the patient is lost because he is bothered by his own sound, which is actually not from outside but from inside. And this creates a bad emotional upset, panics. Sometimes there's a great sleep disturbance, which leads to a lot of problems in the daytime. And the patient is actually absolutely vulnerable to a lot of emotional upsets and gradually a physical, not so well-being. So this is the state of the patient. And what is the state of the doctor? Honestly speaking, whenever we see a patient of tinnitus, this is our first reaction. Most of the ENT surgeons actually react like this. Oh God. So this is a tinnitus patient. He would explain the problem in different ways, which we'll not be able to understand. And there are so many different causes which we may not be able to treat. And then the patient is going to be unsatisfied. I'm going to get a bad name. And most of the time, we try to just take a history, but try to finish off the patient by writing a prescription ASAP and send the patient off without giving any hopes. So the first line that we tell the patient, oh, see, this tinnitus is a very bad problem. It's not going to be solved very easily. We'll try our best, but we really do not know what is going to happen. And if the patient asks too many questions, generally this is the way we try to react. Unfortunately, this is not correct. Because the patient has a problem, he has a right to get answers to his questions. Whether we have those answers or not, we still have to try to find out the answers to his questions. And when we discuss this problem, even in our conferences, let me be honest, that the problem is as big as an elephant in the room. And nobody tries to actually discuss too much about tinnitus. There's 1 or 2 sessions given to this problem in a corner of the smallest room of the conference. Most of the sessions are devoted to surgical problems. So possibly we have to do a little more to this elephant, which is there in the room. We have to address this problem of tinnitus. And we have to take our patients into confidence. We have to take a detailed history. We have to devote some time because our patient deserves a bit of our time even towards this problem. So with this introduction, let's see what are the causes of tinnitus. When the patient comes and presents to us with tinnitus, what are the causes? The causes of this problem can lie anywhere in the body, but obviously the most important reason is the ear and the brain. So it could be the external ear, middle ear, inner ear, central ear, or the auditory pathways. So if I go through a list of the causes of tinnitus, it's an exhaustive list. Obviously, the otologic causes are at the top of it: the noise-induced hearing loss, the old age-induced hearing loss, presbyaciosis, otosclerosis, otitis, wax, sudden deafness, Meniere's, and other causes of hearing loss, which are the most common. Then it could be head injury and multiple other reasons in the brain. It could be infectious diseases. It could be related to some drugs such as salicylates, aspirin, NSAIDs, and diuretics and some chemotherapy agents, TM joint dysfunction is a very, very important cause of tinnitus. So we have to take that in our consideration as well. And then some objective causes of tinnitus, which I'll go in detail later. So basically, when a patient comes to us, how do we proceed? Now, first we have to decide whether the patient has a subjective tinnitus or an objective tinnitus. So what is subjective and what is objective? Subjective tinnitus is a tinnitus in which only the person who is suffering can hear the sound, but the examiner cannot hear the sound. So this is the most common type of tinnitus. It can be caused by most of the time ear problems in the outer, middle or inner ear, and sometimes into the brain. Objective tinnitus is the tinnitus in which the doctor can hear when he or she does an examination with the stethoscope. This is a rare type, but many times we see that. And this may be caused because of blood vessel problems, inner ear bone conditions, or muscle contractions, which I'll come to later on. So once we know that the more common variety is subjective type, and we are faced with a subjective type, then how do we progress? So once we have differentiated that it is a subjective tinnitus, and we are trying to remove the, trying to eliminate the causes seen in the outer ear, such as blockages, wax, debris, etc. Middle ear, such as infection, otosclerosis, and spasms of stapedius muscle and other kind of middle ear issues. Pulsatile tinnitus, which can be sometimes seen as tumors. Inner ear, which could be because of noise, trauma, medication, Meniere's disease, etc. And central auditory pathways, in which we can have brainstem tumors and some vascular loops. So out of the exhaustive list, this photograph which I have made shows you the most common variety in the external auditory canal. Wax is the most common cause of tinnitus. Believe me, many a times a little bit of impacted wax in the auditory canal causes tinnitus. And in this pandemic, where I have been consulting a lot of patients online, I cannot see inside the ear. And when they complain of tinnitus, I'm actually, I cannot decide whether to call them for a consultation in the clinic to remove the wax, or I should ask them to get an audiogram at a place nearby. Because wax is such a common cause, especially in the old age. People complain that they have decreased hearing and tinnitus, and we think that the problem will be inner ear related, but many times it is wax related. So first of all, have a look inside the ear canal, remove the wax, and the problem will be solved. Middle ear, most common conditions. There can be any number of conditions, but the most common is serous otitis media, in which you have some fluid inside the middle ear. You may or may not see bubbles. It could be just early stage of serous otitis media, which is the commonest cause of tinnitus. The other common condition is otosclerosis, which can cause tinnitus. In the inner ear, most common cause is sensorineural hearing loss. Then comes Meniere's disease, which is again a very, very common cause of roaring, low-pitched tinnitus, and acoustic neuroma, which is a constant high-pitched tinnitus. So if you remember this 5-6 conditions, almost 70-80% of your tinnitus issues will be covered within 6 conditions itself. So the moment you examine the external auditory canal, I would suggest you examine it with the otoscope, or if possible with the microscope, so that you will be able to see the eardrum very, very nicely, because many times the eardrum is thick and you cannot access it very well on the headlight or even with the otoscope. So if you use a microscope, you'll be much, much better placed off. And if there's wax, you remove the impacted wax. The serous otitis media, as I said earlier, will be very, very commonly seen as bubbles inside the tympanic membrane, and there's absolutely no need to do any test. You are almost there if you see those bubbles, but many times the drum is a little thick and you are unable to see the bubbles. In that case, you can ask the patient to do Valsalva. If there's a shift in the tinnitus, then definitely that is a sign of serous otitis media. Then there could be retraction pockets. I would not go into the detail, but different types of retraction pockets could lead to tinnitus, because there's a conductive hearing loss. And sometimes there's a cholesteatoma. Many times there's a congenital cholesteatoma. So there's no history of any pain or discharge from the ear, and you still have tinnitus because there's a congenital cholesteatoma. I have operated on 3 of such cholesteatomas patients presenting only because of tinnitus to me. There was no other symptom, and there was a huge congenital cholesteatoma sitting inside the middle ear. One patient also presented with tinnitus and facial paralysis. A young patient around 28-year-old. He presented with congenital cholesteatoma with a facial paralysis and severe tinnitus. And if you are lucky, if you see, if you have a pulsatile tinnitus with things like this, it's absolutely a diagnostic. You are absolutely pleased to see a diagnosis like this. If you do not see a diagnosis, then you have to subject the patient to audiogram. Every patient of tinnitus actually goes through an audiogram, and then you can have different types of audiogram. Now, the commonest audiogram that you'll see is a sloping kind of a hearing loss, which is seen generally in adults. Old adults or even elderly females are more common, but you see it in both males and females. And if you see 2K hearing loss and a conductive kind of hearing loss, it is suggestive of otosclerosis. In almost all the cases, if there's any conductive hearing loss, you subject the patient to an impedance audiometry or a tympanogram. Now, I'll put across some audiograms. There's no point showing the clinical pictures of the patients. This is the common picture of elderly patients who present to us. Now, you can see that this patient date of birth is 55. So the patient is around 65 to 66 year old. And there's a sloping hearing loss. Now, this kind of a patient is classified into tinnitus, which is subjective, which is with hearing loss. Now, I would say that these kind of patients are one of the easiest to treat because there is a hearing loss, which is the cause of tinnitus. And if you find the tinnitus matching with the hearing loss, which is in the range of 4K, 6K, 8K, then a good quality hearing aid, especially an open fit hearing aid, which does not block the low frequencies, but only boosts the high frequency and the low frequencies are passed as on, is the best treatment for these kind of patients. So this is a no-brainer. If you get a hearing, audiogram like this with a sloping hearing loss, purely SN, then hearing aid of good quality, open fit hearing aid is the treatment of choice. Now, problem happens when you get a relatively younger patient or even an old patient with only a dip at 8K. This patient does not have a hearing loss as such. And if you try to give a hearing aid, this patient is not going to accept a hearing aid. But still he has got a tinnitus, which is because of the hearing loss happening in 8 kilohertz. This is a very, very difficult condition to treat because this patient will not accept a hearing aid. Even if you try to give a hearing aid, he will not accept a hearing aid. And the patient will not get benefited by anything. So some very, very sophisticated hearing aids, which only boost up to 8K can be tried, which will actually help those area of the brain cells, to come back. But it's a very, very difficult situation to treat in this kind of audiogram. An audiogram where you have unilateral or bilateral conductive hearing loss. Now, this is a very, very clear case of a mixed hearing loss, but predominantly conductive type. So this is otosclerosis, which is a little bit of cochlear otosclerosis also, because you can see the bone conduction also going down, but the major part of it is still the vestibular otosclerosis or the stapedial otosclerosis. So you can still perform a good stepidotomy and you can get this patient a very, very good quality of hearing. And, this patient would actually be relieved of the tinnitus. I recently operated a lady around 60-year-old who had bilateral otosclerosis with a good amount of cochlear component. So obviously I said that your tinnitus will not completely go because the cochlear component will still be there. I performed a stepidotomy and thereafter the second wave came and the lockdown happened. She's been following with me on the online. She's saying that her tinnitus has gone down by at least 90%, in spite of the cochlear component being there. So I would still suggest that if you have a mixed component otosclerosis, you still go ahead with otosclerosis surgery or a stepidotomy surgery. And if you perform a nice stepidotomy, your patient's tinnitus would also go down substantially. So please go ahead with that surgery. Now you get a situation in which there's no clear-cut reason found. There's no great SN loss. There's no great conductive hearing loss. And when you do the impedance audiometry, there's just a little bit of eustachian tube dysfunction. You can classify it as grade C or even grade A at some time. On the right side, as you can see, you can even say it's grade A, or left side, you can say it's grade C. So in those cases where eustachian tube problems are documented, you can perform some eustachian tube procedures. The procedures I'm going to show you here, this one is a very standard procedure. If the eustachian tube dysfunction is there, you can perform eustachian tube dilatation with eustachian tube balloons. But rest of the procedures are not very standard. Even the eustachian tube balloons are not freely available in our country, though a few companies have started. So these are the eustachian tube openings. I'll just fast forward. And with the eustachian tube balloon, the dedicated eustachian tube balloon, you can perform eustachian tube dilatation. I would strongly suggest that you do not use the frontal sinus catheters or balloons for eustachian tube because they are not of this correct length and the size for frontal. So you put them one by one on each side and inflate the balloon. Wait for 9 to 10 seconds. Now that's the eustachian tube. You go inside, inflate. And after you have inflated and waited for 9 to 10 seconds, gently remove the eustachian tube catheter. Let me be honest that I do not have a great experience. I have only done 2 as an experimental thing with the balloons which were provided by the company. However, there are a lot of things, this is not my own video, a lot of things being done for patchless eustachian tube, which is the opposite of eustachian tube dysfunction. Here you can see the patchless eustachian tube showing the movement of the eardrum with breathing. This is a video taken from the internet. This is not my own video. But if you have a situation like this, they have started performing the eustachian tube endoscopies. And that's the posterior and the anterior cushion of the eustachian tube. And the anterior cushion of the eustachian tube is being injected with the filler substance. Most commonly the filler substance is hyaluronic acid, which actually does not give any problem even if you inject a little excess. Sometimes they have also injected collagen, bovine collagen. So same material that has been injected, some people have injected Teflon also, but that's not very common. So these are the things which are being done. And in extreme cases, they have also performed some eustachian tube surgery. The closure of the eustachian tube is absolutely not recommended. I'm just showing you what is possible. It's not my video, but this is all is the latest which is being happening. An absolutely patchless eustachian tube. They have actually been going down, cauterizing the eustachian tube opening with a monopolar cautery to a small extent, filling it up with fat, and then taking sutures. They're stitching it up endoscopically. So this is all only experimental. I would not really suggest, and in extreme cases, I would not suggest that you start doing it without adequate training or recommendations. But this is how things are being done across the globe now in different centers. And then in the immediately post-operative period, to prevent serious otitis media, they are performing a myringotomy in a glove. Now, these things are well understood, but the commonest audiogram you'll get is like this. Now, this is a normal audiogram. The impedance is normal. And this is a patient with tinnitus. What do you do? Because you cannot give hearing aid, nothing is going to work. So what do you do? And this is the patient which is the commonest. So obviously, this is a patient where an audiologist has to help. He will match the tinnitus to its loudness and pitch. What is the pitch of what is the frequency of the tinnitus? What is the loudness of the tinnitus which the patient is having? And then he adopts one of the 2-3 strategies, that is attention and distraction, habituation, and masking. So masking is the oldest treatment to cover the sound, but the latest treatments are habituation, which is called the tinnitus retraining therapy. So in this, different type of therapies are given, but the commonest which has been given is the white noise. Now this is a low frequency white noise we give it. Then you can give, were you able to hear the sound? I'll just stop share and try to.
Yes.
Oh, the sound was heard?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll share again. Okay, share sound is done. And then the more specific things are in the tinnitus retraining therapy is to figure out at which frequency and at what loudness is the patient getting the maximum tinnitus. Suppose if the patient says on mapping that he has got the tinnitus which in the 4000 hertz range or 4 kilohertz range, then the therapist will give the frequency or if the patient says that he gets the tinnitus more in the 6 kilohertz range, if he says he gets it maximum in the 8 kilohertz, only this is given for a period of 30 seconds and the patient is actually given this in the pen drive so that he can take it himself. The other treatment which can be given is the music relaxation therapy. Music has all kind of notes, so where you cannot figure out which particular pure tone the patient is having, particular frequency, then you can give the white noise or the music therapy. But the more specific 4, 6, 8 kilohertz kind of therapy is more specific, and this is called tinnitus retraining therapy. In my practice, I've been using this therapy for last 7-8 years, and let me tell you, it is a great response, because those patients who are not being helped with anything, they can do it any number of times themselves. They can map it themselves, and they can just go on to Google, go on to YouTube, find out 4K, 6K, 8 kilohertz, and they can listen to the sound, or my therapist would give them the sound of different kinds in a pen drive, and they would listen to that sound. So this is called tinnitus retraining therapy. Or music therapy, many times, as I said, music has all the notes, and you can give a more broader therapy called music therapy. This is called tinnitus masker. Once you have a patient who's not benefiting by anything, then you can give tinnitus masker, which he can adjust the volume and the kind of sound he wants, and he can use this himself to mask the sound. There are also some therapies by which you stimulate the tongue, which stimulates the chorda tympani. You stimulate the ear with sound, and you stimulate the tongue with small, TENS, the transcutaneous, the same kind of waves that you use in TENS, electrical waves, that also reduces the tinnitus. However, the most important breakthrough which has happened, the treatment that people have been using world over, is the analysis has happened into what is the role of oxidative stress into cochlear type of tinnitus, because we have seen that majority of the old patients who have got cochlear degeneration, they have got tinnitus. So I will not go into the details of the research. There are a lot of papers suggesting, this is one of the papers which suggests that oxidative stress has a lot of impact onto the damage of the hair cells in the cochlea, in the inner and outer hair cells of the cochlea. And those inner and outer hair cells, they cause spontaneous discharge of stimuli, which causes tinnitus. And therefore, if you give good amount of antioxidants, there is some amount of regeneration of these hair cells, or at least it prevents the degeneration of these hair cells further. So we know that the outer hair cells are responsible for the sound which is being heard from the outside. And if the outer hair cells are not functioning well, then the inner hair cells the discharge from the inner hair cells become prominent. So if we give good amount of antioxidants, then those hair cells are definitely improved. The inner hair cells are improved, and also the outer hair cells are improved. Their response to external and the internal stimuli becomes better, and therefore there's great amount of improvement in the tinnitus of those patients if these antioxidants are given for a longer term. Now, which antioxidant? Almost all the oxidants have shown benefits, but one in particular, the ginkgo biloba extract, and that too not every kind of ginkgo biloba extract, a particular type. If you look at the lower part, EGB 761, EGB 761, a standardized ginkgo biloba extract, is the one which causes a great improvement if given for a longer time in the treatment of tinnitus. So, going by these studies, we can safely conclude that when there is a tinnitus resulting from the cochlear problem, then definitely this can be treated by ginkgo biloba extract. Now, we have talked about subjective tinnitus, a word about objective tinnitus. The objective tinnitus may not be very common, but when you hear a tinnitus with a stethoscope, that's called objective tinnitus. And if you have an objective tinnitus, you have to see whether this tinnitus is pulsatile or continuous. So I'm giving you a very easy way of, proceeding. So if there's a pulsatile feeling, then obviously the pulsatile tinnitus can be because of different reasons, which can be better picked by contrast enhanced HRCT of the temporal bone, because this is a vascular thing in the temporal bone. So better investigation for a pulsatile kind of a tinnitus is contrast enhanced HRCT of temporal bone, whereas the better investigation for a continuous type of tinnitus is the MRI of the brain and the skull base. So pulsatile tinnitus is generally because of vascular abnormalities, which is aberrant internal carotid artery, persistent stapedial artery, dehiscent jugular. I'll show you a slide on each. Aberrant internal carotid artery. If you see the carotid artery on the two sides, on the left-hand side of the patient, you can see that the carotid artery is much smaller because it's compressed by bone. And the course is also different. For continuous, I think I missed on a couple of slides here. Yeah, so persistent stapedial artery. You can see the persistent stapedial artery at the base of the stapes where the foot plate is. You can see that there's a widening, that is the persistent stapedial artery. Dehiscent jugular bulb, because that will again give you the venous hum. The high riding jugular bulb, you can see on the left hand side, again the jugular bulb is pretty high. On the right hand side, you can see the cochlea. You can see the jugular bulb on the left hand side. So these conditions, and especially a jugular bulb diverticulum, it's not very common. The other four are much more common. Or venous stenosis. These are the conditions in which you get a pulsatile kind of a tinnitus. And many a time you can see the palatal myoclonus. There's a constant twitching of the palatal muscle, which you can treat with the injections. For the continuous one, you have to get the MRI done to rule out the internal acoustic meatus tumors. So for want of time, I would conclude by saying that tinnitus is a very wide subject. There are many causes, so there are many treatments. No treatment is the silver bullet. You cannot just have one treatment for all causes of tinnitus. So you have to find out the cause of tinnitus which is there in that particular patient. If there's a tumor, then obviously surgery will have a very good result. Otherwise, you have mixed results. So whatever treatment you do to the tinnitus, the results are not going to be great. In inner ear disease, where cochlea is the problem, medications, especially your antioxidants and ginkgo biloba has a role. And sometimes sodium restriction has definitely an improved role, because if the tinnitus is resulting because of hydrops or Meniere's disease, or even a cochlear distension, only a cochlear distension, not distension of the labyrinth, still you'll have a very good result with sodium restriction. So antioxidants and ginkgo biloba extracts are quite promising, along with tinnitus retraining therapy in most patients. And with these words, I thank you for your patient hearing. And my sincere thanks again to Dr. Mamta Jain and the whole team of MacLeod Pharma Limited. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vikas. Thank you, Dr. Kaushal. Both of you, and that brings it across. It was very uncommon topics, not very often spoken of, but in terms of epidemiology, in terms of patient suffering, I think it's very, very common to have it across. Coming down onto it, there are a few questions which have come across from Dr. Kaushal. I have shared a few of it with you. Would you want to take it across, or you want me to ask? How do you want to take it?
Yeah, I would take it up, no problem. So this one is from a delegate who says that would you advise would you advise aggressive treatment of OSMF in a patient who has presented with a small malignant lesion in some part of the oral cavity along with primary treatment of carcinoma? Yes, of course. Now it depends where the malignant lesion is. Supposing if it is in the anterior part of the oral cavity and you are going to anyway take up the patient for surgery, you might as well do this. Now, if it's in the retromolar trigon or somewhere in the buccal region, you should be removing this completely. We all know that OSMF is a pre-malignant lesion. So when you're removing the primary, you should be removing this along with the leukoplakia. I hope that answers the question. Another one is please re-emphasize on the grading of OSMF. There are at least 25 types of gradings available in textbooks. But we have to be practical, and the practical one that really counts is the mouth opening that you would see in your clinic. Depending on your mouth opening, your further treatment protocols would be taken into consideration. So if your mouth opening is less than 20, it's around 20 millimeters, it is stage 1, between 10 to 20 is stage 2, and less than 10 millimeters is considered stage 3. Another question is any role of platelet-rich plasma? I'm sorry, I do not have any experience of this. Neither have I heard anybody doing this procedure for OSMF. Of course, it's done for hair transplant and other things. But OSMF, I have not really heard. I'll ask my dental colleagues about this. Is injectable chymotrypsin available? Yes, it's available. It's not manufactured in India. It's available as a imported thing. It's available in most of these Royal Chemist in Mumbai and the bigger chemists. So you can use it for your patient. Now, another question is sometimes despite adequate medical management, the patient has not got benefit in OSMF. So is it necessary to operate every patient who has trismus due to OSMF, although there is no leukoplakia or dysplasia? Let's answer this question holistically. Would you want to operate each and every patient that walks into your clinic who has a deviated nasal septum that you would see on examination? Basically, you should be operating patients who have a lot of difficulty in mouth opening, who have come for that treatment itself. Or if you see any pre-malignant lesion or a lot of leukoplakia, then you should go ahead and advise the patient. But I wouldn't want to operate in each and every patient unless the patient really wants to. Does alcohol consumption also cause OSMF? Alcohol and tobacco have a very synergistic effect. They both lead to precancerous lesions, and of course, alcohol should be avoided completely. Vikas, the tinnitus questions, are you going to take up?
Okay, it's on the chat, right?
Yeah.
Unilateral noise-induced tinnitus, it's completely curable? I don't think. Once there's a noise-induced hearing loss, hearing loss will not be cured most of the times, and the tinnitus associated will never be cured. However, you can use hearing aid to manage the tinnitus. If there's a noise-induced hearing loss, you can use a hearing aid to manage the tinnitus, because in this condition, the problem is the external sound is not coming. Therefore, there's an inside sound which is prominent. So if you use a specific hearing aid, digital hearing aid, which boosts up that frequency, which is 4K most of the times, then definitely the tinnitus will be managed, not cured. Below-us versus tinnitus, which is better in tinnitus? Below-us is definitely Ginkgo biloba, and I have almost 20-year experience since I entered ENT. 22 years actually I have been using below-us. So I have got a very, very good experience of below-us. The Tinex, the brand Keroverine, which has come in the recent times, I have tried it in a few patients. My experience has not been great. However, some people have said that Keroverine also has very good results. In my hands, it has not given very great results. So I would suggest that we still go ahead with Ginkgo biloba.
Because I like to add here, Keroverine is highly effective if the patient has cochlear otosclerosis.
Otosclerosis?
Yes. Okay. No, tinnitus in otosclerosis, but because of the cochlear condition. Yeah. So you can use it there.
Fine. So in post-COVID cases, honestly, tinnitus in post-COVID cases, I do not have great experience because this is very short time, and post-COVID, we have hardly seen patients for 2 or 3 months. But I have not seen too many patients coming with tinnitus. They have been coming with earache. They have been coming with a lot of ear infections. So I cannot straight away say that it's a plain tinnitus because it's associated with some other conditions. My experience. Kaushal, do you have it? Have you seen a lot of patients without any ear infection and only tinnitus post-COVID?
No.
So that's what
I've seen a lot of serious otitis media post-COVID.
Yeah, perfectly all right.
Yeah.
So I have also seen a lot of ear infection and ear pain for which we could not find a reason.
Yeah.
How to deal with a patient who complains of tinnitus, who has taken consultation from several ENT specialists at many different places and still anxious, especially for a young ENT specialist who has started practice. So you are asking me a question which I faced around 20 years back. In Bombay, honestly, I would be sitting in my OPD and patients would be coming with prescriptions of my teacher, Dr. Kirtane, Dr. Pusalkar, Dr. Murwani. And they're saying, sir, tinnitus, everybody has seen, nothing is benefiting. Now you do something. So honestly speaking, it's very, very difficult condition. We have to be honest that you have been already, counseled by the senior people that this is a difficult problem to treat. Just as any neurological issue, if somebody has a headache, many times we do not get migraine, we do not get a cause and we cannot treat it, we cannot cure it at times because most of the neurological things we do not know much at this point of time. Our medical science is hardly 150 year old, but the human body is many million year old. So whatever we know, we'll work up, we'll try to figure out the cause. If we find out a cause, we can treat it. But if we cannot find out the cause, we can just put you on evidence-based medicines and see whatever happens. We cannot assure you of any cure. So this is how you have to put it, because if you promise your patient that your patient will be cured of tinnitus or will improve, and if it does not, then you'll get a bad name. Otherwise, if you're very honest with your patient, you'll never get a bad name. For tinnitus, without doing audiogram, can we give 10 megahertz hearing aid for elder patients? No. See, audiogram is the basis or basic investigation before you treat a patient of tinnitus, because you do not know what you are dealing with. If your patient has got a high frequency hearing loss only in 1 year, you might as well want to do MRI to rule out acoustic neuroma. Why not? So audiogram is the basic investigation. Once you have done your audiogram and the patient is old, bilateral, symmetric, then the possibility of acoustic neuroma is very less. In a young patient, it is more. Then you can possibly give a hearing aid. In a young patient, if you see that the patient has got a normal audiogram, and then you do the tinnitus mapping on at what frequency the patient is getting relief or having the tinnitus, that frequency and that intensity you can give as a tinnitus retraining therapy. If you just give something just like some sound, then it's masking. It cannot be tinnitus retraining. Retraining can be done only on the same frequency, then it will work the best. Otherwise, you can give any white sound, that's tinnitus masking. So any specific frequency you can only give after mapping. Then how successful is masking tinnitus? So my experience of last 20 years is that masking is a general white sound, which I put as one of the slides. Music therapy is better tolerated than the general white sound, because white sound is very irritating, and actually nobody can take on the white sound for a very, very long time. Rather, if you have to suppress that particular frequency, you only use that tinnitus retraining therapy at that particular frequency. It's very easy. You ask the patient to go to YouTube, try out 4 kilohertz, 5 kilohertz, 6 kilohertz, and see which is the sound that he's getting, and try switch on, modulate the intensity of the computer so that he can do it himself. If you do not have a therapist, you need not do it yourself. You do not have to waste your time. You just ask your patient to do it, and believe me, your patient will be very, very thankful to you for prescribing a very good relief, along with some amount of ginkgo biloba and the other things, antioxidants. Kaushal, there's one question on role of submucosal hydrocortisone injection. Will you like?
I think we've already discussed that.
Hydrocortisone you have already taken.
Yeah.
How vitamins are helpful in tinnitus? So general vitamins are not greatly helpful. The antioxidants are greatly helpful. This has been shown by different trials. I showed you one of the trial results, publications. There are many publications on the antioxidants, regenerating the cochlear, hair cells. The exact mechanism is definitely not known. But in general, if you try to give multivitamin and think that the tinnitus will be helped, it will not be helped. But definitely many a times when you give vitamins, if there's a deficiency of vitamins in the body, like vitamin D, D3, B12 is linked with anything and everything. So it will improve your overall health of the body, and definitely tinnitus is also an extension of your health. So any correlation between hypothyroidism and OSMF?
No, nothing that I know of. I don't think so. There's any correlation.
Role of caraverin, I think Kaushal has already taken. Role of caraverin in tinnitus, Kaushal has already taken up. Is there any role of intratympanic steroid injection in tinnitus treatment? Yes, there have been reports and papers on injection of intratympanic steroids, because if you give intratympanic steroids, they will pass through the membrane, will pass into the inner ear, and straight away work on the inner hair cells of the cochlea. However, in my practice, do I give any injection into any patient of tinnitus? No. Reason is what? Because you cannot predict how the tinnitus will behave. If the tinnitus does not improve or worsens, it is only a subjective thing. Only your patient can tell what is happening. If I have done some injection and the patient is unhappy, whether right or wrong, I have no way to defend myself, and I can land up in a big soup. So it was when I started my practice 22 years back, it was actually my senior's advice that do not touch a patient where you are not going to get result. Only if it is absolutely necessary, then go and touch something. Tinnitus is something where patients are generally very, very unhappy. Most of the times, they are never completely cured. So please do not do any invasive procedure, including any injection. Yes, if the patient has lost hopes everywhere and you have no other option, then with proper consent, you can possibly do that. Any role of hyperbaric oxygen therapy? In sudden SN loss, yes, there is a role. Simply for tinnitus, I have not really. Kaushal, have you come across anything? Hyperbaric oxygen only for tinnitus?
We have given hyperbaric oxygen to 2 or 3 patients a couple of years ago in sudden SN loss.
Yeah,
it does help because it's a good vasodilator.
Correct,
but on a routine, no. Other than sudden SN loss, we have not given it.
So the question is on role of hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
There is a role.
Especially in sudden SN, yes, it is.
Yes.
In general, apart from sudden SN, we really do not know. And yeah, I think we have covered most of the questions.
Yeah.
Our time is also up. But if there's anything else, Dr. Mamta, which has come to you, we'll be very happy.
Whatever had come to me, I've already shared. But these are 2 topics which are very, very common and impacting the quality of life, whether you're not able to open your mouth completely or whether it's a constant buzz which is happening into your ear. The quality of life of patient is really impaired quite a bit. Topics which are not generally talked about. So both of you, thank you so much for bringing across, sharing your experience for these two topics, which I'm sure all the ENT surgeons would be of big help for them to understand, because these are least talked about topics and quite bothering topics to patients when it comes to.
Correct.
So we from Medvis would really want to thank about it.
Thank you very much once again.
But before that, I would really want to invite Mr. Rahul Patil. He's from the senior management of marketing from Macleods. Rahul, to you.
Yeah. Thank you both the speakers for their very practical insights. In fact, I remember Dr. Vikas Agarwal saying that these two topics are not very common, but the way it was explained in such a simple way that even the layman would understand these topics. So it was a great pleasure to get these practical insights, and I'm sure that all the delegates who has attended this webinar, they must be immensely benefited with these practical insights. From the behalf of Macleods, I thank both the speakers as well as delegates for sparing their valuable time in attending these topics, and looking forward for each one of you to get engaged with the scientific platforms in the near future also. During this pandemic times, we at Macleods wish you a safe as well as healthy prevention from the corona, so that every one of us remain the safe, and we will be looking forward to meet each one of you for the next future scientific programs. Thank you both the speakers. Thank you all the delegates.
Thanks, Rahul. And this brings across to another one important point that you highlighted, Rahul, that Dr. Vikas had spoken across. Similarly, Dr. Kaushal had made a very relevant point before when we were discussing the topic, and he said, ideally that submucosal fibrosis is seen more by dentists, and they do a lot of it, and actually should be seen by Dr. Kaushal. Would you want to do a parting comment on it?
I hope with this small talk that I have given, more and more ENTs would have a better approach in managing their SMF patients and not just sending them to dentists. In fact, we should start getting references from the dentists for further management. The dentists do not give intralesional injections. The dentists do not do surgeries for this. So why are they treating it?
Dr. Vikas, you have something to add to it?
No, I think Kaushal has already put it correctly. However, I think that everybody has a role. So maybe what we can also do is we can possibly hold a symposium for the dentists, because it's not a great deal for them to give injections. And if we can, help them to treat these patients, because as it's rightly said that these patients would go to the dentist first rather than coming to us. So if we can do some activity for the dentist, Macleod actually can think about it, then it will be a great deal, for the society at large.
The advantage with ENTs is that we would be able to pick up these pre-malignant other lesions also, which probably the dentist might miss out. So a collaboration would be in the best interest of the patient.
Sure, sir. We'll be looking into that proposal, sir. And during our experience also, we have come across many dentists who are having a lot of queries, which they ultimately tend to refer to ENTs. So this cross-section webinars will be really helpful.
That's what I was.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushal. Thanks, Dr. Vikas. Thanks for all your insight. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks the Macleod team. Thanks, Medvis team, for everything on today.
Thank you.
Have a great evening. Be safe. That's it.
Bye.
Bye.
To Ekta and Saleha also for all this.
Yes.
The support.
They are the people for seamless management.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.